here. Waiting for Rick to try to get a good connection to come on in.
Yep. What's up, Tiffany?
Hey guys.
We're gonna let everybody know who our sponsors are real quick, and then we'll jump into a couple things. I want to talk about John's birthday party, but that's appropriate because Tiffany also showed up there. So hold on one second.
It was good times.
It was. All right. Jazz Cabbage Cafe is sponsored by the Botanical Company, Redemption Canna, Real Leaf Solutions, Detroit Nutrient Company, Grow Green, Michigan, and of course 420 Promotions. And almost going to have them included on this list one of these days. But they've hooked us up a lot with some promotional material, and they are legitimate sponsors and support the show and what we do and all that kind of stuff. And they deserve to be on there. I just basically have not done it yet. So, I mean, we have a recap of the Regulatory Reform Committee hearing today, and there's a lot to talk about what happened there. I do want to touch on John Sinclair's birthday. I would probably normally want to have him on here and, celebrate a little bit and that kind of stuff, but I'll just hold off on that a little bit and talk about some serious stuff that's going on and get people who may not have been able to watch or be there today or understand some of the implications of what's going on, and kind of get everybody up to date and have some good information available for that. But on Saturday in Flint at the Genesee Compassion Club, which itself is an historic place for many of us. Jeremy and Ramona Rapinski started that in 2009. That's the third location, although they've been there for quite a while now. And it's a great place. I really like it a lot, and I'm glad that that was made available for this celebration. A lot of it was recorded. It's on the Jazz Cabbage page. I'm not sure how great the sound is and stuff like that. I have to check that out. But John was honored by many people. At one point, Senator Irwin showed up with Ypsilanti City Council Representative Annie Somerville, who is his chief of staff. And they came prepared with a presentation for him, which included this, I guess it was kind of a declaration or proclamation of some kind. And it really had this cool background of all the stuff that John's done. It included Hash Bash and a few other things. And let me see who's joining us here. Mr. Hash Bash himself.
Hey,
I was talking about the presentation from Senator Irwin for John.
Oh, cool.
Adam picked out that they were chronologically out of order in some of the things, but otherwise, obviously just an extremely cool thing. So now this thing was signed by Senator Irwin, Representative Robbie, some others, but also by the governor and by the lieutenant governor. And I thought that was a pretty nice feature of that event.
That's very cool. John loved that.
Yeah.
Yeah, he did.
And
he loved that.
Dave just
Not
got
as
on.
much as he liked the award from your show, though.
Yeah, he liked that because it looked like an Emmy, like an Oscar.
And so for a little bit of background on that, John came on maybe a year ago or something, and just kind of off the cuff, Rick asked him about the story about how a case that he was involved with ended up resulting in a Supreme Court decision that ultimately helped to take down Nixon, because it had to do with not being able to wiretap your own citizens, and that they were not going to be protected. It wasn't okay. And it had to do with the case. John didn't actually do anything, but he got wrapped up in the case because of his reputation, and he was accused of targeted and things like that back then. And he recounted dates, times, people's names, all these things. And it was a really cool conversation. And we were recognized for it. And you get like a little cool looking award with it. And we decided to give it to John for his birthday. And Rick showed up just in time because he engineered all that kind of stuff. We're starting off talking about John's birthday, John Sinclair's birthday today.
It was a wonderful thing. I will say this, though.
that darn Jeff Irwin, right? We went to all the trouble to get this wonderful, beautiful trophy for John Sinclair, and he thought it was the best thing ever until Senator Irwin came with that proclamation from the city of Ann Arbor to give to him. And did you see, John? He clutched it like a child. He thought that was better than the trophy. So he deserved both accolades. But, I mean, we were doing so good, and then Senator Irwin came.
He said he preferred the trophy. So
Yeah, he
that's what
preferred
worked.
your trophy.
There you
Did
go. He was just tired
Yeah.
by the time you got there. Yeah.
Okay.
and it wasn't just the city, though. As I said, it's like the governor, lieutenant governor, and
Yeah.
a lot of
And it was
big
nice,
time
nice
people signed
framed
that
and
thing.
stuff. Yeah.
Yeah.
Good for him. John
And
deserves
also, I
it.
just want to point out on
Putting
Senator
so
Irwin's
much fun.
behalf that the party was originally scheduled in an area that was right near where he lives. So he actually came out to Flint with Annie Somerville, as chief of staff, and also Ypsilanti city council representative to do that. That was just really cool. Now, John performed. He had Jeff Grand with him, which is like his favorite cat and longest time, kind of backup guitar player on his spoken word stuff. So that was cool.
Yeah, he did three. He did 3 performances. It's outstanding.
I'm sorry I missed that. That would have been awesome to see.
Yeah, I recorded one of them. Check and see. I posted it. I recorded them from beginning to the end. The first one he did.
And I'm assuming that those came out, like the performances came out pretty well. Whereas some of the conversations with John and people wishing him happy birthday and giving him gifts and stuff like that, some of that probably might not have come out very well because of the mic situation. But it's all on there. We'll deal with it later. I just haven't had a chance to go back and look at it yet. Anyway, that was just a great time. I get John back around and revisit it and give him a little bit more praise directly and stuff. But this other stuff going on right now, it's pretty prevalent. And there was a meeting today, and a few things transpired and were revealed, and many people have perspective and some feeling about it, and I want to make sure that others who are out there kind of understand this stuff as we do. And a lot of us were there today, and maybe others were watching. But Tiffany was there, Jim was there. I know that Adam was watching. I saw some posts from him as he was watching some stuff.
Yeah, until they shut the comments off.
Rick was there, gave testimony, and that was rare because there was some imbalance of positions given and then Brandy was there too, and
Jim Salim too.
Yeah, I said that. So anyway, Tiffany, I know that you might be most pressed for time, although I know you got a little while to be with us, but I mean, you saw some of the shenanigans of our corrupted legislature in action today. You came from out of state and you're getting involved in this really heavily, and you saw how just blatant and unfair, some of these processes can be. But aside from that, just please offer up any of your thoughts on today and some good information that you want people to know.
Yeah. So for anybody who wasn't watching today, I want you to know that the representatives on the committee had some really good questions. Oftentimes their questions would go unanswered. We, of course, have the answers, and we should make sure that we are providing those answers to those representatives who asked. There were a number of times when people asked questions such as, well, where will these other patients that can no longer be with their caregivers go? Right? No one had an answer for that. The fact is that they're not going to go to a dispensary, because if they were capable of going to the dispensary, they would. So either they won't have medication or they'll get it from somebody down the block, which is exactly what this bill is supposed to be designed to stop. At least that's what they tried to convince us all of today, right, with a lot of presentations and statistics. They asked how many people had been harmed. I thought it was interesting that the people who were saying that harms are happening didn't have any numbers. We, of course, have numbers on this, right? We don't have deaths, but we do have harms. We have poisoned kids. We have people who have taken too much and don't know what to do, right? Those things exist. Adverse events exist, and they're documented by the MRA as well as the National Poison Control Centers. That information is publicly available. It's published every quarter. So there's no reason to pretend like they didn't have access to the information, but they just didn't care. right? Otherwise, they would have been prepared. When you're talking about increasing safety and making sure patients are getting medicine that's safe for them and isn't going to cause harm, you should probably know what kind of harms are being caused. Like, otherwise, what is your premise? Why do we need to make a modification if there's not actually harms? Why would you want to include all the rest of these things? I felt like that was an excellent question that was asked by representatives multiple times, and question when asked and unanswered multiple times. And then, of course, I'm sure you guys all heard Representative Yancey asking a number of times some very pointed questions about the consequences of these changes, especially the consequences of these changes where a crop won't even be able to be harvested between the time that the bill might go into effect if they voted on it and when the drop dead date is for those plants. It was obvious that the people had no idea about the existing rules. I had a feeling that most of the people had no idea at all about the cannabis plant. I thought it was quite interesting that Mr. Linder decided to bring very large pretend plants into the room. I think it's a good example of how much space plants take up. I think there was a question that was really good that also went unanswered, which is, well, how much weed comes from a plant? I could answer that. And we all probably could answer that question.
Hey, Richard
but it went
did. He said,
unanswered.
depends on
right?
how tall it is.
Right.
Yeah, depends on how tall it is, right? But if you're trying to grow regularly and you're growing, you're growing indoors, you have a limit based on ceiling height and distance to light. So you know that your plant's really not going to get taller than, say, 4.5, 5 feet tall because of like normal building ceilings, and the distance that you have to have from the average light that's used by all the growers. If you're doing really, really well, you're going to get around 2 or 3 wet pounds for that plant, which is then going to translate into 0.2 pounds of dry material on average, right? Like, these are normal statistics. They're used for all of the forecasting that people do across the country to say how much their grow operations are going to produce, right? This is not novel or new information, but it was to the representatives who were asking the questions today, right? By the way, 0.2 pounds. Okay, that's less than 1/4 pound. Okay, that's a few ounces per plant, which is less than the weekly amount that people are currently allowed to buy from a dispensary, and that's all you will get for the next 4 months, right? So,
or if you grow outside, all you get for the whole year.
All you get for the whole year, right? And you can only hold on to 15 ounces at a time. So there are other limitations as well, right? And please correct me if I'm wrong about the 15 ounces. I see Jamie's lips moving, but I don't know if he's responding to me.
No, what I'm saying, I'm just interjecting with what you just said. That is one of the original dysfunctional interpretations of the MMMA. You notice in the MRTMA, it was written very specifically in there that you can have what you've harvested. The 15 ounces was intended to mean when somebody's out and about and in possession, delivering cannabis to their patients. Of course, if you could grow up to 72 plants, even if you're staggering or whatever you're doing, you can easily have more than 15 ounces at a time. And that was understood. And if you don't take that reality into consideration, that's a dysfunctional interpretation. And that's, while we're opening up the act and changing things, fixing a bunch of that kind of stuff might be a good idea too. But please go ahead. I just wanted to interject.
But for sure. So I really felt like the basic, last week we were talking about, hey, here's some things that I see, in last week's ACE meeting, we're just like, hey, here's some things that I see as they just don't make a lot of sense. Well, it's obvious that the people who wrote this really didn't make a lot of sense. The thing that really gets me, I'm a licensed operator. Okay, guys, I'm not legally allowed to be a caregiver. My wife is a patient. I can't grow her medication, right? It's just not allowed for me. Now, I suppose we could try growing it in our own home and she could be responsible for it, but I could maybe touch the plant. But even that is a gray zone. And I don't like gray zones because I'm in quality assurance. Okay. So all of those things being said though, I don't think anybody thought about, well, what if these caregivers all want to stick around and they want to have more than one patient? Let's say we keep all 30,000 of them. Now the regulatory agency, which already struggles with enforcement and inspection and licensing, now has 30,000 additional people that they're responsible for. And $500 isn't going to cut it. $500 isn't going to hire the people that they're going to need to go through those documents. It's not going to cover the inspections. It's not, I mean, regardless of not wanting to remove rights or make changes or any of those things, even if we could get on board with wanting to make changes, the changes that have been proposed are not sustainable. There's no appropriations mentioned. It's, we had a representative today who was in support, who came from a rural area, who can't manage to do home inspections for codes review in a rural area. And yet they're now going to be able to do licensing inspections on an annual basis for every caregiver in the space. I mean, really? Like, if you can't manage, if your sheriff's department, your local law enforcement can't currently manage to prevent illicit activities from occurring when you know they're occurring because you're getting complaints to your neighborhood association, because they were there as well today to tell us, just why no one wants weed to be grown in their neighborhood because it smells weird. Which, there's lots of ways to deal with that, by the way. Like, it doesn't have to smell weird, and there's plenty of people who think that it smells great. So, whatever. But you got all these complaints. If you're having the complaints, then you have cause. If you have cause, you can get a warrant. If you get a warrant, you can go inspect. Right? If you go inspect, you find somebody's doing something they're not supposed to do, then you can prosecute. So we're going to create a new set of laws to potentially create additional criminals. We're not actually taking care of any criminals that are currently existing. It's just very confusing for me. And it just makes me feel like they are actually uninterested in the bill being enacted, in enforcement, in monitoring. I know I talked to you guys about this last week a bit. I was happy to almost hear, I think it was Joe Sullivan, talk about not being able to make extracts. But not being able to make extracts, that means my wife doesn't have medication.
That's a huge one. You're right.
Okay? Full stop. Okay? She cannot possibly smoke enough weed to get the level of medication that she needs for her MS. Okay? And MS is a terminal, debilitating disease. And the only thing that's keeping her alive and making her be able to do the things that she wants to do on a regular basis is the fact that she has access to medical cannabis in our state. Now, I can't be a caregiver here, and I can't find a caregiver here. So that means I spend hundreds of dollars a week buying medication at a dispensary. And I just happen to be in a position where I can spend hundreds of dollars a week to buy her medicine. But I know that if you're on your Social Security benefits because you're retired, or you're disabled and you're on your SSI, or you're an average person making an average amount of money in the United States that's spending 10 to 15% of your income on weed on a monthly basis so that your family member is not in pain and isn't having spasms and can eat is not realistic. And that seemed to be incredibly lost on everyone who was on the supporting side. They seem to be lost that these are real people, right? That we're talking about, close to 100,000 humans.
Think about
that
this.
Have given their rights to grow their plants to a caregiver. Not just all the humans and customers in the state, but the ones that have actually chosen to go with this method. And that kills me. If I wasn't blessed to work for a licensed operator that pays a living wage, there's no way I could afford her medication. How many people are suffering from that right now? And that was barely mentioned, and only mentioned because people were there to testify as being patients and being caregivers who were struggling with these things. It just makes no sense. And when I thought about, what about making this little baby's tincture? And I found out just how dilute that tincture was. Yes, Susan did, and it was amazing. Also, Stacy says Susan Fisher.
We'll talk about testimony here for sure.
Right?
I mean, that's a
big.
But
seriously, I'm gonna do processing. I'm not gonna make these products because one person buying a product from me isn't gonna cover the cost of the production batch and testing required. I need to make things that everybody wants. And you know what? Even if all what is it, 263 pediatric patients wanted to use the same tincture, it wouldn't be enough to make it commercially viable. And that's why we need caregivers. And that's all she wrote. And they won't be able to make these things any longer because they're removing the ability for us to create extracts. And that's wrong. It's wrong to reduce the number of patients, and it's wrong to reduce the number of plants because of reducing the number of patients, and it's wrong to force people to allow inspections by law enforcement and other such things when they have no cause to come into their homes, because there's no reason to have law enforcement around when you're a legal, law-abiding citizen.
Right.
Right? But then to top it all off, even if you jump through all their hoops, now you can't create the medicine you need?
There's no cost.
That's how I feel about that.
It's far gone, and as we've said many times, it was worse than the description that we got before we were actually able to read it. You were going to say something, Rick.
Oh, just that the structure of the meeting itself meant that those voices Tiffany said she wanted to hear, the patients talking about how the concentrates were going to be taken away from them, they were structured so close to the end that some of the most impressive testimony happened when there were very, very few actual voting representatives left in the room. I don't even think they had quorum at the end when they were still taking testimony. And in my mind, it is God. I'm glad that we had a chance to get our words out, but at that point, it's not really doing us justice.
Well,
I mean,
I'll jump in and say this. First of all, I think Rick had some of the best testimony out there. Calling these motherfuckers to the carpet like he did for being douchebags in the way they behaved. I mean, and then they went on to expose themselves as the ill-informed, uninformed elected officials that we know that they are. So from what I saw and heard in that testimony, well, first of all, the Municipal League and those clowns have been spewing that garbage since 2008. They haven't changed their tune at all. But the politicians showed how uninformed they are, and they're not capable of passing judgment, if you ask me, on these bills. They still have to be educated before they could ever vote these bills out of committee, because they proved it in their questioning that they have no concept as to what we are talking about, how it applies. None of it made any sense to them. I think that was fairly clear. And my big question is this: if they're supposed to have a second hearing, who's going to speak from the other side at that second hearing? Because it sounds like they shot their shot. And
that's a good point.
for an hour and 45 minutes, yeah.
correct. And if there is a second hearing, I don't expect to hear the Municipal League. I don't expect to hear Steve Linder. I expect to hear nothing but patience. And for those of you that were there, I wonder how many cards he had in his hand.
They kept bringing them in, Adam.
I know they did. I know that.
You'd see this guy bring in another 5 or 6, bring in another 5 or 6. There were over 100 people there today. I'm sure, Tiffany, you'd agree with that, right?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the entire room was packed, and we filled almost the entire of the overflow room as well.
And I would point out that alone had them running scared. I believe that alone had them questioning the way they were questioning.
They, what I noticed that was upsetting when they got to do their huge presentation. Throughout their presentation, they kept on saying, today you're going to hear other people come up here and say this. You're going to hear other people bring this up and bring that up. But when we got up there, our representatives, they cut us off when we ever brought up anything that was said or anything to that. It was just the rules were not equal.
What the fuck did car sales have to do with weed? Can someone explain that? Because we weren't, from what I saw, nobody was allowed to testify to anything that wasn't in those bills.
Nobody testified on Zoom
don't mention automobile sales at all.
No, nor do they mention alcohol. And he had a bottle of booze on there with a bottle of wine. You could drink both of those bottles and die, essentially. But now with cannabis, it was a horrible, horrible, horrible day.
Well, let me just say this. We saw Steve Linder, and as Tiffany mentioned, bringing in some fake plants to simulate how much space is taken up by a 12-plant garden, which would not even be the subject matter of the bills themselves. He had a whole presentation about this is what medicine looks like. This is aspirin. This is Sudafed. This is a jar of cannabis I got from a registered thing, and then this is this terrible thing I got from my caregiver. None of that was related to the language of the bills. That was all theater, man. And yet, when we got up there, George Brico, Joe Sullivan, myself, we were all told we had to stick to the language of the bills. This just underscores how unfair this treatment was.
Y'all remember Bush holding up that bag of crack cocaine, right? I'm waiting for the meme of Linder.
I might be too young for that one.
You are too young for that, Tiffany. Don't worry. We had these presidents. They were called George Bush and his son. And anyways.
So I just wanted to because Mr. Hashbatch said something that they were afraid, and I just wanted to make sure everybody was clear that they are not. Right? The representatives in that room were not afraid. They were not afraid to silence Rick. They were not afraid to make sure that we ended with an unfair amount of time without a balanced review of the issues on both sides. We showed up. I showed up before anyone else was in that facility. Okay. And I sat in a room with 5 gentlemen for 15 minutes before the people who carried the signs that were the plants for the MCMA even showed up. Okay. And I submitted my document to the clerk before those people even arrived, right? Certainly they didn't allow everyone to speak. Obviously there was an agenda, even though it was not a published agenda, that said who was going to speak in the order in which they were going to speak, because those people were called to order and had presentations and whatnot available. I know I've talked to a number of people in the past, but being an activist is one thing, being a lobbyist is another. The lobbyists worked with the clerk and the representatives, the chair in this case, to make sure that their agenda was going to be heard. They knew that the presentation was going to be there. They provided the presentation before it started so that it could be shared with everyone else, right? This was not done at the last minute, right? And those activities and doing those things, that doesn't show fear. That doesn't show them running. That shows organization. This is the same tactic that they used in Washington, same tactic that they used in Colorado, right? They're trying to enact these kinds of rules, and they start with the medical side, and they say it's about safety and making sure patients are safe. And then they tell you that you can't grow in your home any longer, or they put in ordinances to make it very, very difficult for that to happen, right? Exactly. Jamie, it went away too soon before I could read it. So, Joe Sullivan said he was told he was going to speak 5 days ago, before some of them even knew the time and the place that the hearing was going to occur. And that's how these things work. And we can all be angry about money and all of those things, but we know that in our country, it is money that makes the politics work. It is the money that makes people be able to show up, right? It is having the money to take the time off to go to the clerk's office and have the conversation and get on the agenda. And I think that the more we show up and the more phone calls we make and the more letters we submit, that's the only way we can combat that, because we're not all coming together to spend $1 million on a PR campaign. Unless Rick is getting ready to spend $1 million on a PR campaign, which he could be, because, he's awesome.
The new Michigan Caregivers Association is raising some funds, and they hired some professionals to try to do some effective work in that matter. Actually, I also heard from Rez Khan today during these hearings, and he was appalled. He said he submitted testimony, so I guess we can see if that's on record later on, and that he wants to help out in that regard with combating some of this professional work with also some funded professional work. So maybe we have a little bit of that going on.
Just a quick explanation. Rez Khan is the head guy over at DNA Genetics, who's been linked to MCMA companies in the past, but seems to have a bit of a rebel spirit about the whole thing. feels, at least states philosophically, he agrees with us and has tried to be supportive, even though he continues to work with the MCMA companies because of his contractual obligations. So that's who that is for those people who didn't.
That's a good summation.
That's a clean disclaimer.
Right? DNA has been about growing at home and growing your own forever. Right? So that's not a new thing. And making people, people getting aligned with it not being allowed, it just doesn't make a lot of sense. I really feel like we have this opportunity now to provide the education. And it became very obvious, I think, to all of us that people had no idea. They were asking the most basic questions.
So Tiffany,
I was surprised.
Describe a couple of the testimony, or some of the testimony given that you think is notable, and that's something that people should internalize as part of this conversation.
From which side of the testimony?
Well, I think from the few that got to be in opposition.
Yeah, so I think Susan really, really hit it. That here is a patient whose life has been irreparably harmed by something that she has no control over. And she's able to get relief because caregivers, supporters, as she called them, give her medicine. That she could not afford to have the medicine in any other way. And she really hit home, I thought, that it's about these people like her. And then she started listing off other conditions. The guy with MS, the guy with HIV, the grandma with glaucoma, right? Like, these are the people we're talking about. And in many cases, we're talking about people who are they're gonna fucking die, okay? Cannabis isn't gonna cure them. They aren't gonna recover, okay? These are people with terminal illnesses who are choosing cannabis, who are choosing to use a caregiver instead of a different option or a different system, whose quality of life is being bolstered by having access to this plant and the concentrates that come from this plant and the edibles, as Joe so specifically put. That nobody's coming in being like, please give me 2 ounces of marijuana. No, they want their edibles, right? They want their dosing in a way that they can take it on the regular without having to be Mr. Lowell, smoking 40 joints a day or whatever it is that he smokes, right? I mean, not everybody can be as cool.
It's never too late,
right? You can always learn.
It's just not in the cards, especially for the pediatric patients, right? So, I mean, it really doesn't make a lot of sense what they had to say, and it was obvious that when they were asked, "Hey, did you talk to any caregivers or any patients?"
What a bullshit answer that was.
They didn't. Yeah. Why would they? That's what
yes, I'm not going to throw out all the names or anything, but just know that stuff wasn't included in there. So
the perspective was represented. No, you're full of shit.
Right? I mean, I know as there's some people who are like, hey, what's up with these automobiles and alcohol? Just in case you guys were wondering, all cannabis companies use these indicators to show just why cannabis is a good thing to invest in, right? Because we don't have the dips that everybody else have. We just have a nice straight line going up towards profits. All right?
Up. Even with the war on drugs. It's always
even with the war on drugs, even with this ridiculousness, even with the regulations, even with the ridiculous taxes.
Right. And I can guarantee you the more they do, the more it's going up.
Well, what really upsets me about it all is all this shipping thrown back and forth. It's because they're so uneducated about everything, and the way that they presented it, the opposing forces there, how they presented it, they were even making lies about caregivers being in one house or several caregivers that are growing, and how there's so many plants, and it's like, okay, sir, if that's your county, then clean your shit up.
Because it's not legal. It's not legal today.
We already have rules.
It's not legal tomorrow.
But that was the kind of misinformation they were throwing out there for the people that were sitting up there trying to understand it. And it's also their job to understand a little bit more and to stick around. I don't know. Yeah, it's
Yep. There was one gentleman who I think did know quite a bit, and he was very upset about the overages. And he was upset about the fact that that people are very laissez-faire, very flippant about talking about what happens with those overages. And that happened today with a person who was giving testimony in opposition to the bill, right? Where, hey, what happens to these things? What are we supposed to do with them? Well, I'll tell you, you make them into concentrates, okay?
Right.
Because they stay longer. Or you put them in the compost. Like, we all know what's supposed to happen. It isn't, well, we sell them to the guy down the street. Because that's not part of the law. Now, whether you're doing it or not, that's on you, and you can make those own choices. But the law as written doesn't allow for that, right? It's written in such a way, as I'm sure you guys know, right? Because at the federal level, it has to say that we have these controls in place with track and trace underneath these ridiculous memos that prevent funding of things where the feds come in and like steal all your stuff. And let us not forget that the feds are coming in and still ruining lives across this country for people who are growing cannabis, for patients, right? They arrested like 400 people in California last week. This is not yesterday. It's not 15 years ago. It's last week, and it'll be next week, and it might even be tomorrow. So when we talk about these things, we want to secure our rights, and we also want to acknowledge that the fear of the criminal activity is there because there are still criminals. I've been seeing some stuff go across about Arizona. I came from Arizona, and when I was there, we had training on how to handle drug traffickers and cartels, right? And some people would talk about it like it was funny, but while I was there were grows that would be down across the border that they would get raided by the cartel, right? We can all talk about that the illicit market isn't a real thing, but we also know that we're getting around $2 billion in weed from California every year. Probably also $500 million from Canada, because Canadians, right? I mean, those things are real and those are happening. And it's our regulatory environment that is making it so that people are not interested in growing their own, making it so that people are not interested in, buying from their local dispensary. Because I'm still blown away at $15 a gram. Just going to put that out there. Wow. I came from Colorado. You buy a $45 ounce there all day, every day. I don't know what it is with people buying freaking $15 grams. That don't make no sense.
Coming here. Just wait.
Okay. And I'm looking and I'm seeing those things. But if you can't be reasonable and inside, nobody's going to go out. Well, I guess there's some people that go out and pay $35 for a 12-ounce beer. But most people are like, give it to me for $1 or so. And that's what we're talking about here. And if we wanted to fix these problems, we could adjust licensing requirements. We could allow for more testing to occur at a cheaper rate, right? Because $700 and losing 11 grams of your batch, which, by the way, when I was doing my own batches, I never even had 10 grams of concentrate that I could submit for testing. So I don't know what they're thinking. That's just not possible, right?
Well, the whole thing's like exaggerated and just like
it is
layered,
It is, very much so. We also have to be in the same place where when we look at the statistics, we know that there's about 30% of people who are cannabis users or had previously been a cannabis user, or maybe are not willing to admit that they're cannabis users unless it's anonymous. Okay. And then we've got like 30% of people who are like interested in cannabis, right? And that 30%, that third of the population is like, well, maybe. Maybe their friends do it. Maybe they might do it, but they have concerns. Maybe they're teachers and they're worried about losing their job, or, they're truck drivers and they know they'll lose their job, right? Like, whatever. There's that group of people, okay? And then there's a third of the people who do not like cannabis, who don't want anyone else to have access to cannabis, right? And we know those people exist, okay? Those people have money. Those people are going to call their congressman. Those are the people who are calling on their neighbor that's got their few plants that's being a nuisance, okay? They're the people who are the holdout when somebody wants to buy a block and demolish it and like build a new, manufacturing center, right? They're the ones that were always calling on the guy that was on the corner anyway, right? Those people exist and they want us to go away. And those people are represented today, right? Yeah. Those people are represented by the Michigan Township Association, by the Chamber of Commerce, right? Those people are complaining to their cities, right? And they're complaining as businesses. And because of those complaints, they have support in that way, right? What can we as a group do to make those complaints go away? Because we all know that there's ways to reduce odor, right? We know.
Well, I mean, like they think that the activity is competition, to the huge investments and stuff like that. So I mean, like, what would really, as long as it goes on, I think that they're concerned about, trying to make it not go on. And as you alluded earlier, they get away with a little bit of this. They keep going.
They will. And when we talk about, I don't know if you guys were paying attention to the fabulous presentation by the Anderson Group, because I'm sure everyone was like really pissed. They talked about cars and stuff, but they also talked about tax revenue, and they talked about just how much tax revenue the government doesn't get to collect right now because caregivers don't have to play inside of that. And they talked about just how much tax revenue doesn't go because illicit growers and adult use home growers don't have to pay taxes.
Putting it on the list.
They're putting it on the list.
Yep.
And I'm going to argue that they were wrong by tenfold on those numbers.
The statistics have been basically the same for a long time. And on the caregiver number, because I've run these numbers myself a number of times because I care about big data, right? They're very, very close. And that's taking the total number of patients, the average normal unit sale, so how much a patient is using on a weekly basis, and multiplying it by the prevailing rate. The prevailing rate is, I think, something that fluctuates and is a little silly, but it's usually between $5 and $7 a gram at the national level. And that's how they drive those numbers. So, it's $1 billion.
Hey, so a little insight into the character of the committee. This was posted, or this was put up by Ida a minute ago, and I heard that Jim was hanging around at that time.
I was sitting right there.
Was that like a weird experience? What was your perspective on?
I didn't see him actually say to them. There are 3 or 4 of us that were privy to that whole experience. But their reaction after it happened was what I caught, and they were pretty upset, or at least, taken back by how a representative would do that. I mean, it's very unprofessional, and I think it's almost grounds for his removal from something.
Come on, we feel the same way about it.
Just be considering though that this is a person in that 30%. His question was specific about thinking that everybody who uses cannabis is a criminal, regardless of legal framework. That nobody deserved to have it, and that we got to get rid of it as much as possible, right? He thought everybody in that room, probably also the people from the MCMA, were assholes and needed to get out, right? And remember, that is 30% of the population, guys, that really don't want us to be here. They think, regardless of if you're a patient, if you're a caregiver, if you're a licensed operator, if you're a recreational user, whatever, that you don't deserve to have these rights. And that's just how it is. And he's in that camp. Yeah. And there are 30% more guys just like him.
Yeah. And do you think that these guys, out of that 30%, what's the percentage of people there that have tried it before and didn't experience it in a good way? And how many of them are ones that want to try it?
So, I always go with the 80-20 rule. So 80% of them, right? Okay. And they just, didn't like it, or didn't have a good experience, or had a good experience, but then, decided that for a religious reason or something like that they weren't going to do it anymore. Because there is a lot of that goes on. I've seen it not just in cannabis, but in other things as well, where often the loudest opponents are themselves in the closet, as it might be said.
Some of the biggest users.
Right? Or they used to be the biggest users, or they're users of other substances. And the shame is what drives their passion.
Yep.
We see it in many other things, not just in this, right? So
there's certainly a lot of shame today to drive their passion. I'm really curious about Brandy and her experience. We haven't heard much from her, and I know that she was sitting right there in the front row today.
I was trying to keep Brandy out of the conversation, so thanks a lot.
Well, future representative, you're doing really well.
Well, one of the things that, certainly, Rick, you were a hero today. You all were heroes. Everyone who showed up today is a hero today. and we didn't get our fair shake at time at all. It was all about talk about money, talk about the dangerous caregiver marijuana, and very little time was spent on actually the whole purpose of the Michigan Medical Marijuana Act, which they're amending, is to provide patients with a continuous, uninterrupted supply of their medicine. And they kind of forgot the roots of why we have this law, that the people passed this law by 63%. And when they passed it, they knew and supported the caregiver system. Dispensaries didn't exist then, and the ones that popped up were 100% entirely supplied by the caregiver grows for 10 years until the state finally got it together to allow a retail market for medical cannabis.
So they got sick of hearing about all the deaths and
and all those children that were getting that regulated cannabis.
Right. So
Shelley
the children
Egerton,
who
by
were
the way,
sickened
was
by
the head of.
product were sickened by a adult use market, or illicit market using adult use packaging. It wasn't medical marijuana that got into the hands of the children, and they're worried about all this damage to patients and the safety of their caregiver. I know that for myself and my caregiver, we have recipes that we use. I know their process. I can see their plants, and I can see what's going on, and I know exactly what's in it. Whereas when I go to a dispensary, I find out I bought, if you go to a dispensary and you find out months after you smoked it that there's a recall. There was an article just the other day that I was going to bring up if I had my 2 minutes of time. Was the headline was no comment from the MRA of how tested medicine that it was tainted ended up on the store shelves. So if I'm going to trust my product coming from my caregiver, or am I going to trust the recalled product from the retail market? Because they're trying to say that, all of this danger, but they don't actually understand the relationship between a caregiver and a patient. Many of us are long-standing. Many caregivers are being taken care of their family members. And so limiting the patient to being only just one per caregiver. So if you and your spouse or your child and your parents, you could be one person and all 5 people are in your blood family. And what are those people supposed to do? It was obvious that no one cared about the repercussions on families and patients. And it was all about, well, these caregivers have dangerous weed that's going to take away our bottom line profit margin. And that was really distressing to me. And truly, if they actually cared about what patients needed, they would have listened to the patients, because of the 100+ people in the overflow room, and I don't know how many people were there, but I know that maybe there were 6 people for the MCMA and their felt people, and the rest entirely was all going to speak in opposition. They didn't care about hearing our stories today, and that was evident in the disrespect that they showed in the imbalance. So I want to encourage people to use the vehicles that we have available to us right now with social media. We all took the time to write or type out our testimony or practice on the ride and look in the mirror. We all knew what we were going to say from our hearts. So I want the patients who and their caregivers to use that social media, and you can post them on our Americans for Safe Access page, post them on the Michigan page, post them everywhere, and share your testimony, because they came for the patients first, and medical marijuana was the gateway for the adult use law. But if they're going to take away our rights, they're going to come for you next. Adult use market.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I want to add something.
Anything that's not them is vulnerable.
Right.
Yeah, all home cultivation is in their target, right? Which is why I can't understand that we don't have a larger collection of home growing stores coming out in opposition to these. I would think that would directly impact their bottom line. I know, Adam, you're trying again.
So
That's what the
a little bit
MCA is
about.
all about.
Go ahead, Adam.
That's what
Sorry.
George and his group, the MCA, are about. Is those grow shop owners.
Michigan
We're starting
Caregivers
a
Alliance.
second group that's specifically geared around that. And I just want to say, I got to speak with my own representative on Friday, and we discussed a range of issues and consequences, with the potential of this law. But it was the the breaking down of a small business based economy that has grown in support of the caregiver system that he cited as the reason why he would be in opposition.
Right. And George pointed out, I mean, this industry has grown over the years, and it hasn't grown because of the regulated market. The regulated market doesn't buy from guys like George Bierko. They order their containers directly from the manufacturer.
Right.
This is the caregiver market and the illicit market that has caused grow shops to go from 10,000 square feet, or I had a 5,000 square foot shop in Royal Oak, in Ann Arbor back in the day, to now 100,000 square feet. I mean, these places are huge now, and they're doing millions and millions and millions a month. Some
Employing dozens of people.
Correct. And
George said he has 50 employees between his two stores.
correct. And you have to understand that any dip in this market is going to affect those people directly, because that's a customer service based business. And as soon as the customer base disappears, the service is no longer needed. And that's why I have a real hard time when they talk about the illicit market and what they think it might be worth, because they certainly haven't gone to the people who may have a clue and asked. Because George can tell you exactly what his how many plants are being grown out there, because he sells the buckets. I mean, it's so simple, some of this. And it's just, again, lack of knowledge, lack of information that is allowing these political people to be influenced by these outside forces. And that's something I think we need to become an outside force.
Right.
You know?
Randy Crowell.
There's
An
a
old schooler who's been through the ringer.
he's been a cannabis POW.
Support. Yep.
Yeah, for
And
sure.
I don't know the guy's name, but I think we should give a shout out to that representative that admitted to being a drug dealer.
Yeah, the guy in the back row that said in the 70s, 80s, I was selling cannabis too.
No. He was in the 70s and 80s. He was a drug dealer under the law.
Yeah,
There
right.
was no cannabis back then, sir.
Yeah.
It was drug
I fixed
dealing.
it.
It's a narcotic. Schedule
It
one
was a
drug.
narcotic
Treated
in
pretty
the
rough.
70s. Thank you.
I fixed
Guy
it.
could have been sent to prison for 20 years.
Or his
Yeah.
life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Life.
Right?
But it
In the
didn't
80s.
stop him. And that's the point. None of this is going to stop guys like
No, it's
that.
not. I've said many, many times, you are going to take away this legal right, but these people are not going to stop the behavior because they love their patients and they're not going to sever that relationship. You're going to take innocent citizens and turn them into accidental criminals because you pass a bad law, and that's just not the way government should work. I'm
And
sorry,
you
maybe I'm
can't judge-
idealistic, but that's not how it should work.
And you can't judge a book by its cover. And all because somebody's a cannabis user doesn't mean that all this other stuff equates. Okay. There are people out there trying to grow a little bit of weed, and if it works out for them, maybe they'll become a licensed or a carded, individual. But right now they're trying it on their own, and society's attitude has changed on this.
Yeah.
The government now needs to catch up. We no longer are treating cannabis users like we did marijuana users, to use your people's language.
But you can absolutely see where when we go from 5 patients to one patient is equivalent to the allowance for plants that an adult use guy already has. So if you're over 21 anyway, then the medical and the adult use are identical. So you can then see where the patients become, discardable. And now you're left with the adult use market yet, and then that's where you hammer on. So you can see how this is a multi-phase process, and that we're just in the initial, probably only the second or third stage of their big major plan, but we've got to stop it here. And the best chance we have is either in committee or in the House of Representatives, because the Senate is so dominated by conservatives, it's very unlikely that we will get to stop any bad amendments that come around, or that we'll get them to not approve it when it comes to the vote of the full Senate. So this is really our last stand. I hate to use all of the different euphemisms because they're all from losing battles, but this is really what we.
If it hits the floor, we need 28 no votes. And everybody working on their own rep is a big part of that.
I'll also point out too that these bills are so corrupted that I don't think we can support amendments to them. I think they just at this point have to be discarded.
Go away.
And we have to craft new. There are so many different changes in the subtle languages that are included. For example, the concentrates language. You got to completely get rid of that. That's going to totally interrupt medicine the way it's created legally right now by patients and caregivers for 12 years. So if they're not interested in
no caregiver needed, right, Rick? No caregiver needed. Even a patient, even if the rest of the law passed, now the medicine can't be created. Full stop.
That's right. So you're talking about a change that's not exclusive just to the medical marijuana program, but to the entire cannabis industry itself in Michigan. And some surveys have indicated that as much as 50% of the adults in adult use cannabis states have used cannabis in the past. So that could be potentially 3.5 million people in Michigan that know when you have a little pot, nothing bad happens. It's impossible for the government to lie to these people anymore, but it is still very possible for these people to lie to the government now. So this is so wrong.
It's obvious that the forces of prohibition aren't just going to go away because we passed the 2018 law, and we still going to keep fighting. They're going to want to control it one way or another. We've really been blessed in Michigan to have such a very good growing permissions, and it's because the stakeholders were at the table during the drafting of these different ballot initiatives and other things throughout the years. We finally passed the MRTA in 2018. So we have to make sure that the stakeholders are going to be at the table now. There are no patients that I know of that were at this table. And they say they reached out to caregiver groups, but it's going to be really essential that we have to.
They didn't have time to name all the groups.
Influence on the clerk and the chair of the committee. So this is where the organizations can get their constituents organized, and I suggest making those phone calls, but then having meetings. They really need a good training and education. They have no basis upon which to make any decisions. I also suggest that we need to just kill these bills. And if we're going to talk about better access for patients, then let's give them some ideas, like maybe we should have insurance cover it. Especially if they're going to force us to go to retail markets and take away our caregivers, then who's going to pay for it? I want my insurance to cover my medicine. Make sure that you give them alternatives to make our lives better as patients. And that's what I suggest in the next few weeks, is that we have to put that focus back. Because the focus on caregivers, at least from my Americans for Safe Access standpoint and the voice that I represent with patients, other consumer groups or other caregiver groups or Michigan Normal, they have their different focus too. So we all working together, deaths by many cuts. We have to keep educating because these people are clueless. It seems like they forgot when we passed the law in
they did. There's term limits, and there's new people in there now.
Yeah,
there's no historical perspective for some of those people.
Right. So it's a whole new education process.
Jamie, do me a favor. Would you please put up Marjorie Teachout's "What can an individual here do at home" comment?
Yeah, I was gonna get to all that and really start talking about that a lot in a second. I agree with you. I want to do that, but I know that Tiffany's got to leave at 5. I just wanted to see if you wanted to make sure you get a last thought in before you have to split.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Thanks. I appreciate that. I think the biggest thing for me, I sat in a hearing today and I cried, and I held Brandy's hand because thank God she was sitting next to me. And I cried because they lied. I cried because the information that was provided was just wrong, and not a little wrong, right? Grossly misconstruing the facts, which we know is the politics of the day. And then our side got up, and I cried more because these were people who were going to be harmed by these changes, and they didn't have a seat at the table, and they deserved one. And I know that it sounds like Rick was saying, hey, let's bring up this and what we can do. But if you're listening and you think this is going to impact you and you haven't picked up the phone, and you haven't written an email, and you didn't show up to a rally, and you didn't come today, and you didn't submit a comment, and you didn't ask your neighbor to do the same, and your friend, and your mom, and your coworker, they're not hearing enough of our voices. So it's all of us together, just like it was all of y'all together in 2008 making this happen. Okay, this didn't happen because, you know, the government just randomly decided, oh, they want cannabis to be legal in Michigan. No, it was a concerted effort of all of us working together. And to prevent changes like this, we all have to work together too. And that means if you're a pot smoker and your mom don't know, you need to have that conversation with your mom. You cannot be in the closet about being a patient. Those stories, the personal stories, right? You know, a couple weeks ago, I gave a speech about why are these laws written without science and they're so emotional. It's because legislators are emotional, because they're humans. And we have to give them our emotions, real stories with real faces. Because otherwise, all they get is what they saw today. A bunch of people with dollar signs coming out of their eyeballs. Right? And that speaks a very specific thing. It talks about tax money, where their next campaign contribution is going to come from, but it's not humans. So you can give that emotional speech to them. That's what we can all do. And I'm sure Brandy and Jamie will make sure that y'all know all the phone numbers and all the email addresses that you can send. Because the websites already exist for you to click in, put your name in, it'll put your address in, it'll pull up your representative, give you the phone numbers, send your message off right away. It's a call to action and it's not hard to do. So those are my closing thoughts. I appreciate the time today, Jamie.
Yeah. Appreciate it.
I wish they would have given you a chance to speak, Tiffany. Goodness. I appreciate your information.
Yeah.
I sure hope you're there next
You
time.
sit right behind me. I was just pulling so much good energy from being surrounded by supportive people because, man, it was hard. It was hard to sit there today. It really was.
You know, getting used to how.
I so appreciated being with you, Tiffany, and really, really wish you'd been able to speak. But this is going to go on. I love when people share this broadcast and your participation in the ASA chapter, all the other work that you do with the MCIA, truly building coalitions with knowledge and science, but also, you know, like you said, the heart and emotion. And I love being with you, that we wore our masks because we were safe from COVID, but it helped hide the tears and kind of collected like we could sit like the ladies in mourning crying because they really are going to cause a lot of people harm.
They are. People are going to, they're going to not be able to walk. They're going to not be able to eat. They're going to lose so much weight that they'll die. And I know people don't like to think about that kind of stuff, but that's what was happening before people had access. Yeah. Right. And, you know, I know you guys know this, and I know I said I had to leave at 5, and I will go here in a moment. My wife has MS, and we were living in a prohibition state when she got diagnosed. And we moved. We're American medical refugees. We moved to a state where she could have access to our medicine. And having access to that medicine means she can walk, because before she couldn't. It means she can eat, because otherwise she couldn't. She still lost almost 100 pounds and is wasting away before my eyes. She's still in pain every day. But having access to this medicine means that I can watch TV with her, that I can watch her paint. She will never work again. Right? And she was 35 when she was diagnosed, and she will never work again. And they gave her 5 years, and we're on year 8. And I am thankful every day. And I know that when she doesn't have access to this plant, she deteriorates almost instantaneously. She can't even get out of bed. Then she can't eat. Then she's vomiting. And it is terrible. I know the power of this medicine. And I know that if I don't even accept a job in a state where she doesn't have access to it, and anyone who wants to take that away from her, oh, well, they just have to fight me. That's just how it is. So
I'm sure.
I leave you guys to it. Enjoy the rest of your show.
Thank you, Tiffany. Appreciate it. We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tiffany.
Yep. You know, there will be a second hearing. There will be an opportunity for people to to testify again. So Marjorie, your question about what individuals can do at their home, we heard a lot of it in just what Tiffany said. At this point, there are just a very small group of legislators that are going to be voting on this particular set of bills. And those are the people we really need you to reach out to. In a larger scope, after these bills get out of this committee, they're going to go before the full House. So any representative is good for you to reach out to. But we've shared publicly in a couple different places the list of folks who are on the Regulatory Reform Committee. We want to make sure that you have those email addresses and those telephone numbers available. And call as many of them as you can. Let them know exactly that you disagree with these bills and make your voice heard. And then, of course, there's the ever popular showing up at this next hearing. We had over 100 people today. It sent a strong message. If at the second hearing we also have 100 people, that will be a really strong message. It'll be very difficult for a representative to stare at that crowd and vote against what they want. It's really tough for them to do. However, if it's a sparse crowd, because everybody got burned out from the first time and they didn't get to speak, and so now they're bummed and they're not going to come out again. If that happens, it'll be very easy for them to do something we don't want them to do. So continuing to contact your lawmakers, especially those that represent your home districts, and showing up at that particular thing. And then
there's things like this right here that you can see on the screen. So there was people there's a post meeting after the hearing today. And there were a couple people there that really wanted to see like physical documents, not be directed to a website to do something, or and get some help through that process. And there are people that might need that extra guidance, and More Than Hope, and I think that's the organization that's behind this. At Vehicle City, a couple of times are organizing people coming together and it's also effective to handwrite letters to your lawmakers. In some cases, you can get together and do that and have effective messaging with discussion within the group and that kind of stuff. So this is a really cool one at Vehicle.
I just have to make a
Vehicle
note.
City Social.
Vehicle City Social only accepts medical marijuana card holding patients. So unless they've made a very rare exception, which I don't think they probably did, you probably have to have a medical marijuana card in order to get into Vehicle City Social and participate in that. However, if you don't, you can certainly reach out, and any of those people or ourselves will be able to direct you to how to do it properly yourself. But Vehicle City is also having another event. There's one tomorrow. Then there's also one on Sunday. The deal on Sunday is if you send a message to your lawmaker, you're eligible to receive a breakfast. So,
Yummy.
yeah. October 6th and October 10th is the other one.
And it is More Than Hope in this case, which is the organization that Amy Carter started, who also gave testimony today. And she is the mother of Jaden. Jaden's bill is named after her, which would allow pediatric patients to use their cannabis on school grounds.
I don't think these people understand that pediatric patients are required to have their parents as a caregiver. So when they mess with caregivers, they mess directly and in a very personal way with kids, sick kids who need cannabis. And I know there's been a lot of people saying, good job, Rick, and things like that. I still feel bad that I didn't have an opportunity to actually say words like that, because I got emotional over the fact that we were being disrespected as a community, and that the way they were looking at patients and caregivers was just as second-class citizens. They begrudgingly gave us time today, extending it 15 minutes, but doing so means we only got to see 4 lawmakers. I appreciate the gesture, but it was sort of an empty one, especially considering how rough they were on some of the speakers, some of our speakers today.
The way we've been reading about it in the comments section, but it hasn't really been discussed how great you did, Rick. You did a fantastic job, and I really appreciated you getting up there and really doing everything that you could in every way possible to
Rick
get
Thomas.
your point across. Yeah.
Well, and just calling them out.
I'm sorry, Detroit Free Press.
Just calling them out for their bad behavior, I think, is what I see as what was most important. I mean, I was sitting at home watching this thing on my computer, and I started screaming. I was hooting and hollering. That was the
Yeah.
greatest thing I'd seen all day.
Yeah, it was great.
Because it was obvious they were disrespecting. You know, and Rick's not here to see this, and I don't want to give him any ideas, but I wish they'd have had to drag his ass out of there.
Yeah.
I couldn't go. I'm sorry. I can't speak in front of people like that because I'll tell them what I really feel.
Yeah, you know,
I
And
was
they'd have had to
standing
drag
there
my
when
ass
there's
away,
four
disrespecting
bailiffs
me like that.
whooshing towards him to take him out, and I was really wondering, are they going to do it, and what's going to
Yeah,
happen
them guys
after
in the
that?
red coats don't fuck around.
yeah, those guys are ridiculous. You know, I think the second hearing, like we were just saying, it needs to be the same, if not more people. And with the caregivers group, I think they need to find their patients and assemble them and bring their patients to the next hearing. I think that makes perfect sense to have those people up there too, speaking on their own behalf. If they can get there, half of them are like probably dying, but you know, the ones that can make it.
Well, but this is also bigger than just patients and caregivers, and that's what I think George Bierko pointed out, that there's all these side industries that
Right.
you know, that are on the peripheral that are massive and do all kinds of business, and they're going to be affected by this.
So yeah, we need representation from that too at the next hearing.
Yeah, and you know, I really hope that if this next hearing goes down the way I think it should, it sounds like they'll continue on down the list, and it should be nothing but patients and the like who are against these bills. I don't know how anything less than that would be appropriate, to be honest, because there's obviously a lot more people showing up at a public hearing that are opposed than are for.
Well, the I don't know if the MICA is officially like in opposition. I know that was discussed. I don't know if that's really the case, but for sure they don't support this. You know,
It's my understanding they were waiting for a vote of their board before they came out with a public statement.
okay. Well, I mean,
So-
point being, like,
But they
like
don't support.
those people weren't at the table. They don't support this, and bare minimum, that's what we know for sure. If it's in actual opposition, that's a pretty strong scenario, and you know, that's very helpful. The caregivers we discussed, the patients, all the relevant advocacy groups, the cannabis activists, all in opposition. None of them part of the discussion.
Right. And one of the things I'd point out is that these are all like freshman representatives that are introducing these bills. And Steve Linder's considered a slime ball in the halls of the legislature. People don't want to see him coming. So, you know, I think they've shot their shot and exposed a lot of stuff and have given us a lot that we can now use against them. I mean, to take these bills down, almost like this committee today wants to make sure these bills don't pass. So they just teed up a bunch of stuff for us to knock out of the park next time.
There's an incredible amount of ignorance, as we've been discussing too. They
Just
don't
ignorant.
Understand this. That results in this type of shit too.
I mean,
And their
I'm thinking that
decisions out
we
in the
almost need to put a lobbyist luncheon together where these people can come and, you know, get whatever they get when the lobbyists get their ear, and they can actually be educated. I mean, I'm not even looking to sway their vote, to be honest with you. I'd just like to educate them and teach them what's actually going on and what the realities of it are, and then let them make their own decision. Because I do believe once you're educated on this and you take your head out of your ass, that you're not going to vote against patients. Matter of fact, you might come back and try to figure out how to get rid of these bills and write some sane bills that do some of the things that would be really nice, like allowing caregivers to put their product in the system
First of
in
all,
a sane way.
You have them accept, which is true, if they care to like really examine this, that this was a fabricated health issue, that a lot of resources went into creating an issue out of thin air. That's not an actual thing. And there was no, as pointed out many times, there was no actual like set of circumstances that is a problem in need of correction, or victim, or people affected by the concerns discussed. They don't exist, and they haven't. So there's no problem in the first place. And it's frustrating to show up with a lot of good reasons not to do this when they haven't established a good reason to do it in the first place. But that's how these influences work, and people not wanting to really break it down and be satisfied logically with what's happening, is a problem. As I guess Tiffany said, there's a lot of emotion. There's also a lot of money.
Yeah. Well, in that one study they talked about, the polling that they did, where they asked people, and we don't know, of course, the exact question, which, as someone who's paid for polling, that's one of the nice things about doing polling is you get to ask a question and then you get to regurgitate the answer while never telling the people who hear the answer what the original question was. So we don't know what question was asked. But yeah, I would think most people, if they're given the opportunity, would want tested weed. They think that's a good thing. Maybe
right, but I'm sure those questions had an assumption.
Oh, no, right.
Based in the fact that if it's not tested, that it's necessarily
correct.
dangerous or bad
correct.
or something like that.
And that's part of the problem with all of that nonsense is it's just bogus information, because we keep pointing out that there are no bodies. There are no
Sorry.
Rockstar Rick, fresh off a Free Press interview. Sorry, Adam, finish up there.
That's all right. No, I'm just saying that there are no ill effects on any grand scale. I mean, there's always going to be some issues, we know, but they make it sound like the reefer madness days of old, and you just can't do that nowadays. I mean, it's about information, and we need to educate these people.
Here's the thing, though. You can only educate people who are willing to learn. And at this point, if we're forcing information at people who are already very busy in their world and don't have, a whole lot of interest in the subject matter, the question is, how much are they going to absorb? What we really should be saying is, what's the integrity level and the morality and the character of these particular people making laws for us? Instead of us trying to educate them, maybe they should actually do some soul searching. I mean, boy, that's really pie in the sky, I know, but we really should have a better caliber of person making law for us than people that are just willing to buy into that multi-million-dollar public relations campaign the MCMA has been dealing on them.
Well, that you have to blame on their own constituents. Yeah, but well. I was, while you were gone, I pointed out the fact that I just forgot what I was saying. Sorry. I'm sorry. I lost it. It happens.
They almost took you
away. It happens to me way too often. Go ahead.
Oh, yeah. I was hoping they would have taken you away, Rick. I mean, I'm really proud of what you did and giving them shit and all that. And I was hoping you would have stood your ground just a little longer and they could have hauled you off.
In the movie, when we do the movie, he'll get hauled out.
Yeah, you should have.
Yeah, I'll be in cuffs in the film, right? Yeah,
just to embellish.
Woody Harrelson will play me, right? Okay.
Well, I was thinking Clooney, Rick.
Oh, Clooney's too old to play me. Ooh, I said that. Oh. Anyway.
I really wish Steve Linder would have poured himself a shot.
Yeah. Well, again,
set up without the license.
For those of you who weren't at the meeting today or watching it, the absurdity of the Steve Linder presentation, because let's call it, that's what it was. He came out, he sat in front of himself at the table facing the legislature, a bottle of wine, some other booze, a big jar of aspirin, some Sudafed, and then, proceeded to do a little presentation about this is what real medicine looks like. This is what, other real medicine looks like. And then he reaches down into a bag and pulls out a big jar of cannabis. Now, Adam L. Brook, if you or I pulled out a big jar of cannabis like that at the legislature and held it out for the whole chairman and everyone else to see, I doubt that we probably wouldn't have. I bet something probably would have happened to us.
Well, Rick, I was actually going to suggest earlier in the conversation that at this next hearing, somebody, and I guess maybe I'll do it, shows up with what 12 plants look like. Actual 12 plants ready to harvest.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well,
because the reality is it doesn't hurt anybody.
It doesn't. But to talk about the continued absurdity of the Steve Linder presentation, so he's got this. He pulls out this big jar of cannabis. This is what regulated cannabis looks like. Then pulls out the bag of fake weed that he holds up in a baggie, right? Exactly like Brandy actually has a simulated version of what Steve Linder had in his hand at that particular time there. So, but afterwards, what many people may not have seen was that they brought out these 12 gigantic posters, which were supposed to simulate cannabis plants. They started to put them up on easels. And the chairman stopped the presentation. Chairman said, "You cannot block these people's view of the proceedings. So you have to go all the way over here." So they had to go way to the edge where they were completely useless. But he was going to put up 12 posters of cannabis plants to illustrate how much space is taken up by an average cannabis grow. Now, all of this pomp, circumstance, smoke and mirrors, dog and pony show, which I called it and I got in trouble for, all of this went down, right? And then they were yelling at me for not sticking to the language of the law. I was so restricted in what I could talk about by the chair. After Steve Linder had this gigantic, everything except for clowns and balloons, man. So it was quite ridiculous. Plus, I mean, let's just talk about how unfair the timing was. An hour and 45 minutes. And we had the Anderson Economic Group. We had the lawmakers. We had MCMA, the Michigan Transportation Authority. We had the polling guy that testified by Zoom. We had another lawmaker in there too. That's a long time to give people that were paid to be there, right? And not very much time at all given to people who carved out the time out of their day to come down. This is why our children hate government, actually, by the way.
And they didn't regulate their time either. That was the other thing that I found somewhat interesting was that, you know, we all know when we go, some of us have been doing this.
Or somewhat fucked up.
But we all know when we go speak to city council or whatever, we get our 2 minutes or 3 minutes. And I was shocked that there wasn't, the chairman didn't read from a card that said, "Here's the rules. I'm going to call you up to the thing. I might call you 2, 3 at a time. You're going to get 3 minutes. When this light goes on or when I hit my gavel, you're done. Don't make the guys in the red coats drag you out of here." Yeah. Instead, he called up his buddies.
Yeah. Someone said handcuffs were seen. So, by the way, someone told me that they saw the guard pull out handcuffs when I was at the chair. As the
Dude, listen.
I think that's true. I think
not
I
be
saw
the first
that
time
too.
I've been in cuffs. It won't be the last, I'm sure.
On one side and 2 coming from the other direction.
Little old me.
Yeah, maybe it is Woody Harrelson after all. Maybe.
Yeah. See what I'm saying?
Yeah,
he's got the range to play. Moi.
As Woody charges over the table at the legislators.
Yeah. Yep. You know,
embellish a little.
Yep. And again, I'm just going to say, I've done this many times. I don't lose my temper. I don't get upset. Today, I lost my temper, and it was not the way that I normally present on behalf of Michigan Normal.
If you'd have kept talking, Rick, you wouldn't have been as influential. If you'd have just given the speech you planned on giving and not called out, what'd you call him, Evil Steve?
I did.
Nice catch on that, bro. Because when I heard you say that, I was like, wow. But, I mean, you know, you wouldn't have been as impactful because it was obvious they were treating us poorly. And it was obvious what they were doing. And it was so obvious that, you know what? You told them so without telling them so. And then you had to tell them so because they're too stupid to pay attention.
Right.
I mean, it was it was comical. I mean, if it wasn't so sad and serious, it was truly comical. And to be honest, I would have thought the people on the committee had assessed before they went out and took testimony based on what they were saying. Like they had stoner moments like, well, how does this work? Like they had no idea what they were even.
Yeah. When did they decide that you get 5 patients per caregiver? When did that happen? 2008, ma'am, and
Yeah.
they voted
Okay.
recognition.
Five
Oh,
plants.
72
You kept
plants.
saying
Who cares
5
why there's 5
plants.
patients? There hasn't been
Right.
an issue.
How about Mr. Representative? There is no such thing as overages. It doesn't exist in the law.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
guys are creating it now.
Yeah. All cannabis possessed by a patient is presumed to be for the medical use of that patient. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Well, don't forget, it's still them against marijuana.
It
And
runs
that's
right
the
in line
problem.
with what we're seeing in politics and just like ineptitude and just, people playing dumb or making up statistics to benefit whatever version they want.
Well, and we've seen this same dialogue happen in municipality after municipality. Jen Bronson's out there fighting hard. Buddy Dalton in Flushing Township too, really trying to stop the degradation of the caregiver system on an individual municipal level. These are two sides of the same bad penny, right? You got statewide corruption, plus you have local retraction. It's not looking good for caregivers in Michigan. This is maybe the only fight that we have a chance to win, because I got to be honest with you, there's not very many victories coming on our behalf in that municipal challenge that people are doing. So we have to be careful. See, there's the giant plants over against in the side that they were supposed to put on easels to simulate.
Wow, those cost them a lot of money.
They got plenty of money.
Yeah, no.
Imagine if this is what.
Is that a
I want
close-up
one
of
of
a
those
bud, or
signed
is
by
it a
Did you
Steve
whole
see
Wonder.
them collect those when they left? I might call Linder and see if I can buy one.
They pack those up.
Yeah, I
Those
would
are
love to
Brandy
have one of
sent
those.
these.
The size of the buds, imagine how big, if your plant had big buds like that. That's probably why they're so afraid of 72 plants, because they think this is one bud.
Well, and
It's
here's
not
the thing.
It's a bud. come on.
It's
I
just a
know.
blow-up picture of a bud.
I was going to get inappropriate there, but
Okay. Here's the thing. Tiffany Coleman once again hit a real important point. When you're growing cannabis at home, you're not achieving the same level of results that you are in a commercial cultivation facility. So if you're one of those people that doesn't know anything about cannabis and you look at these pictures, these optimal pictures of the perfect garden, which we see on news media all the time, you are going to sometimes see Christmas trees being grown. If that's your understanding of cannabis plants, and you don't realize that some of the most medicinal plants are the smallest and the least desirable on a commercial basis because they don't have much yield, even though their medicinal qualities are outstanding. So not everything yields that way. And people have an impression of the industry that's really not correct. Here's a picture of Steve Linder and his collection of stuff. I guess he actually had liqueur there also, right?
Yeah. He had a bottle of a wine, a bottle of beer, and then a bottle of some booze.
Bourbon.
Wow.
Bourbon.
Sounds like a song.
and it's funny because he
Here's
couldn't have
one.
brought enough marijuana to kill you.
He also had Sudafed and mentioned about how you had to, get it from behind the counter with the license.
Yeah, well, the dope
And
fiends
how
fucked
this
that
was
up.
the DEA has a tracking number. He emphasized that, and they emphasized so much about the tracking portion, and so perhaps that's the elephant in the room is they oppose the but they said lack of accountability. So if they have evidence, just like if you're breaking the law now, there's no reason to make this new law that's going to harm patients. If they want to create a market for people who are very good entrepreneurs and want to go into this market, then lower the entry for the micro license or some other more appropriate commercial place for you to take your caregiver product. But if you're just a cannabis grower, then the distinction between medical, perhaps that's what they're all saying, is that like these growers are growing and it's not really all medical. But those who genuinely are taking care of their 5 patients are not the same people that they're trying to regulate. And the patients who depend on this, the veterans who depend on this, we lose 22 a day to suicide. Veterans have PTSD, they get cancer, they get all kinds of other ailments, TBIs, et cetera, from their service injuries. Those patients are being left behind in this. The pediatric patients we talk about, elderly people who are disabled on low income or people in poverty, people who use RSO, MS cancer patients, and the list goes on and on. All of these people's very lives are depending on this caregiver source. And that is, I want to keep bringing back the focus to say, okay, let's protect patients and our medicine and our access to our medicine. And you are, by our caregivers, under the mantle of our protection. We choose you. And I feel very offended about this whole thing, is that they're trying to say that I don't have a choice any longer of having a caregiver. I'm forced to go into their retail system, you know? And so if I go to the supermarket sometimes and I try to grow a little bit of my own tomatoes and vegetables, which, by the way, it had a horrible year, could not grow anything outside, too much rain. And so crop failure is a problem. The whole thing is that they don't understand. I do think that education works. And I also know that even though there are the legislators who seem to be bought, there are also the legislators who have, through time and with education, become our allies and our champions. Senator Irwin is just one of them. And there's a whole new group of new legislators that need to be educated. So I'm making it the Michigan ASA chapter to keep scheduling constituent meetings. So I want to reach out to any of our allied groups that we should work together and coordinate. We can do trainings together so that people are comfortable and knowledgeable. They have all of their talking points, and we got nice glossy literature like they had. We can put stuff in graphs and we can show them the truth. We can show them that 72 plants is not going to produce these big mega farms that they're trying to say we're doing. We can show them the numbers of the sick people. We can show them the number of people who've been harmed by this from all of the statistics that Tiff talked about. So we should, I think, be urgently doing that, knowing that if we're not going to get our voices only in testimony, this is going to eventually have to be a whole project where every patient is going to have to reach out to their legislator, and they're not alone. That you can look to Michigan Normal and ASA and the other advocacy groups that are out there that have together we're a very strong, united force. There's a lot of people who showed up, who heard about it from different avenues and different ways, and I'm urging every patient that your story needs to be told, and your caregivers depend on you because you choose them. And it's a sacred choice. This is a sacred plant too. I believe that, and that when we take care of the medicine, it takes care of us. So I feel that when we disrespect the medicine like they're doing by trying to take away our sacred rights to our caregivers and the rights to grow, they're taking away something that the people promised, was our promise to patients, especially when we passed the adult use law. So don't go back on your promise that you said that we were going to have our own source. Mm-hmm. And whatever else you guys want to do for the business guys, I'm all for. Yay, make your money. But
leave us the fuck alone.
Have our homegrown. And
you hit it on the head, Brandy, at the end there, just about the sacredness of the plant and how that's what's missing in these people. They don't understand that this is a plant that brings so much goodness and medical value to people, and it's more than just people getting high or growing these giant things. There's so much more of a byproduct of the beauty of the plant, and they're so misled on it. That's why I was so mad when I saw them bring in all those beautiful pictures of those buds, because those were their pictures, and I'm like, you don't even deserve to have anything to do with this plant because you disrespect human beings.
I'm concerned about this whole tracking portion of the act too, and I'll just bring this up quickly. Ideally, what law enforcement would like to do is if they walk into a place and they see a metric tag, they turn around and walk out, because that's a monitored place, and every place that doesn't have metric tags on their plants would be illegal, and they could chop it down no matter what the rule was or what the local ordinance was. That would be their ideal, right? They could easily identify legal and not legal plants, and they could have a field day. Right now, it's difficult for them. I don't mind that it's difficult for law enforcement. I think they should have to have a high standard before they decide to take plants out. Just because you find something doesn't necessarily mean it's legally not compliant. There are court proceedings that could take place. There are interpretations in law that could be a factor. I know in Detroit that there were some grows that were originally taken down by the DPD, which later on the owners of those particular grows seem to have won cases against the city of Detroit for the destruction of their particular property. So, I'm fine with the police having a little bit harder time to do this. Tracking is an expensive proposition. And let's remember, too, the Director Brisboe was on one of my radio shows, 420 Post, and said, we do not have the infrastructure right now to test caregiver cannabis. We do not have the infrastructure right now to track caregiver cannabis. Although it's true that they could always add more servers at the Marijuana Regulatory Agency to expand the metric database in order to computer-wise accommodate for that. Training all the people that would be using those metric tags, the individual caregivers, and the ongoing support that you'd have to have in order for them to stay in compliance, that's expensive. They don't have the people for that. So some of the proposal that was included, it's inapplicable. It will never actually come to fruition, or it'll take so long for it to happen that it will just be a joke until it does.
You know, there's a lot of room to peel back a lot of this really stupid shit that is being proposed in this and still effectuate a lot of harm. And if they get, they anticipate or hopefully want to get involved in a negotiation, and then there's a lot of room there to give up a lot of stuff, but still leave something that's a pile of shit. That's what the Walsh bills were.
Right.
So that's, we started with something shitty and fought our way to something that didn't absolutely kill it.
That's why they need to be punished for what they did, and these bills need to just go away.
They do. They need to.
They can't be supported in any way, shape, or form. And if they were to amend them to something palatable, they don't even deserve that at this point.
It doesn't matter what amendments we make in the House anyway. The Senate will probably, if these bills get to the Senate is where the worst fuckery happens in Michigan's cannabis history. That's where all of the worst stuff happens to these bills. And after the Senate is done with it, they send it back to the House for a super quick approval vote. They quickly approve the changes, reconciliation it's called, and then it's done. And our opportunity to say boo to these people is over, and they don't really care.
If this gets brought back out in a lame duck scenario, there is no opportunity for public input.
Right.
That's true. Lame duck is that period of time after the elections, but before the end of the actual session, usually about a month long, essentially, 3, 4, 5 week period where the legislature meets. And it's almost like a consequence-free thing. It's almost like spring break for legislators. They can vote any way they want, do crazy things, not pay attention to what their party wants them to do. And some of the most bizarre marriages of convenience between Republicans and Democrats happen in lame duck. And people that were our allies suddenly aren't so much of our allies because, they had to trade off a vote on this to get a vote for that. It's the kind of stuff that happens, like Mardi Gras, They're all collecting beads from each other.
I will say, though, that with the lack of information that I heard today and the lack of knowledge that I heard today, it seems like if we could educate these people as to the truth, as to what are in these bills and what we're talking about, that in good conscience, they couldn't approve of some of this stuff. And because these bills are tie-barred, it would throw, we just need to get rid of one of them or part of one, and we're done. So I do really think that these people, I don't think they were playing games either. I really think they were this uninformed. And again, I've been doing this for a few minutes, and there's a lot of people who are uninformed about marijuana that have no concept, that only believe what they've heard over the years and haven't heard anything to the contrary. So, it doesn't really surprise me.
The legislature's sort of an echo chamber, especially with the ruling party. They law enforcement says something, they pass it around the circle. Everybody says, yeah, sounds great. And there's no citizen input. That's what we saw today. The person from the the representative that initiated one of the bills was specifically asked, how many caregivers did you talk to before you drafted this bill? He said, it took 2 minutes to say absolutely nothing. But the answer was very clear with his non-response, and that is none. They did not include our people. We've talked about this a couple times during the broadcast, but that's so apparent when you read the language of the bill. And it was even more apparent when you watch the presentation given by the sponsors today, both the lawmakers as well as the corporate sponsors too. I can appreciate where the corporate sponsors know better, but just are trying to project a particular perspective in order to advantage their clients. That's what the MCMA does. But when the lawmakers, honest and truly, just didn't understand or didn't get it. My local sheriff needs more tools to be able to solve this problem with the caregivers. The tool he wants is contained in these bills. That's the sacrificing of all addresses of caregivers in anybody's jurisdiction. Cops can call anytime and say, give me a treasure map of all of the caregivers in my particular county, and I'm going hunting. And that's exactly what they do. Remember, we've advised you many, many times, people watching Jazz Cabbage Cafe, there's no such thing as a compliance check on your garden in the state of Michigan. You have the right to not allow people in your home if you are a caregiver until you have legal representation. Call somebody. You know the names: Covert Law, Camoran Law, Rudoy. You know these guys. Scott Roberts, the people that have been on this show and on the other shows. You know who to call. Cannabis Council, abso-freaking-lutely. Those guys specialize in it. Barton Morris Cannabis Legal Group. Call a competent attorney before you allow your personal cultivation to be inspected by law enforcement, unless they have a warrant.
I guarantee you'll fail that inspection. Even if it's not right away, they'll use that against you at some point.
But
Can I paint a pretty picture I was just thinking of? How about this? I like that, Brandy. How about this? How about the fact that, they did let, the MCMA, whatever they're called, talk longer than all of us because they gave them more money, or they gave more money, so they had to appease them in that way. And they only gave us a little bit of time because they know that these things are all tie-barred and it's never going to pass anyway. So they're just going to appease them, let them do the presentation, and then cut us off, make us feel like, it's not going to work. But then in the end, we end up winning.
Well, remember, Steve Linder's lost.
Here's how we'll tell.
I want to end up winning. I like that. I like the.
I
end.
like winning.
I like the way the plan ends up.
Yeah.
I like
Let me
leaving
just-
no patient behind. I like us asking for what we really ideally want instead of just settling for always being in an opposition position. That's why I like Jaden's law. We're on the good side on that. So if they're going to start messing with us, I think that when we have our discussions with our reps and saying that this is a bad bill, I want you to do better. And we need to have that on the negotiating table.
It's always best when you can come in and say, this is a list of things I support, and these are a list of things I don't support. That way you don't come off as being completely negative. But let me just say, to Jim's point, how we will tell as far as whether today was good or bad is how quickly they schedule the second hearing, because almost always when they schedule a second hearing, they vote that time. If they feel like they've got the votes, like we were not persuasive today and it's just going to get rushed through, we'll probably see a hearing in 1 week, maybe 2. If we've done a good job, or if they don't have the votes, we won't see a hearing scheduled for a little while. And if that's the case, I'm going to feel a little bit better about what happened and about what's about to happen too. But I suspect that because they only require 50% approval at this particular committee level, we'll probably see a quick hearing and they'll get it out. Because that's how the fix is in on the system. That's how it works. So we have to continue.
And remember, at the end of the agenda, there's this catch-all in any other business. And I don't know if, at any time they could choose that they need to vote on that thing, and they just slip it through at some point.
They are
tee it
required.
up for lame duck.
They're 48 hours required to notify for a meeting, but I don't know if they have to have a 48-hour notification for a hearing on a bill or not, just for the meetings themselves. So
Right.
They could add that in. But that would be, see, the media is watching this issue because I think we all know cannabis is a hot subject right now. Everybody, as you can see, media is all over the place on this. So I don't think they do any kind of crazy, screwy stuff like that because of the backlash that they would get from media. And it's so public at this point. But anything's possible. These guys are devious.
They've got enough Republicans on the committee that all they got to do is have one more hearing. And no matter what happens at that hearing, say, you know what? We're going to do the right thing by the people of the state of Michigan, and we're going to let the full House speak on this and send it to the floor, or send it out of committee. Then the question is, does it get taken up on the floor? And I do believe if we make them look bad enough in committee, there's a chance that it may never see the light of day on the floor if they don't want to be embarrassed over it.
Here's the real problem too, is that, and you're absolutely right, everything you said, Adam, and they probably will pass it out of the House, and they'll probably try and make it look like a win. Like this is the way democracy works. We want the full House to be able to express themselves, just like you said. But the session lasts for 2 years, all the way to the end of 2022. They have a history of ramrodding stuff like this, where they will vote on it one day in the House and nobody knew about it, and then the next day it's passed out of committee without any hearings, because the committee, a Senate Majority Leader rather, can do that, and then all of a sudden the Senate votes on it, and then within 1 week, a process that's supposed to take several weeks just gets rushed right through. And that's what they oftentimes do with controversial legislation, so they don't have to deal with the negative press. 2022 is an election year too, kind of a big one. So I think that they are going to want to try and come down on the side of we're the people that cleaned up that dirty cannabis industry. We are the ones that were fighting for safety in the cannabis industry. We Republicans. So they would look at that as a win in an election year, something that they could turn into campaign cash, if that makes any sense to you.
Solid analysis. I say we bird dog them at every campaign event if they're gonna keep trying to take away our rights. And we also do the education side too. Cuts deaths by 1,000 cuts, right?
Exactly. And then bring a couple of bottles of booze and put them on the table and say,
Tables,
yeah, if
right.
you drink this, you're going to freaking die.
You could die. You could
seriously,
die.
you could die.
Yeah. And the giant bottle of ibuprofen. He got the giantest bottle and the Sudafed too, because I want to, that was the trusted medicine.
I got to tell you too, though, if you go to any grocery store, you're going to pass an entire aisle of stuff made by GNC or some of these other off-branded stuff, which are cinnamon bark pills or aspergum or whatever. There's just a ton of things on the market right now available to us, which are sold as medicine right next to these other medicine products without any FDA approval and without any testing or guarantees. So
the herbal industry has been fighting them for generations, and it's only lately that the FDA has had some peripheral approval of some herbal medicines. And I would argue 100% that marijuana falls in that type of category. That again, we have no harm. We see no harm.
Yeah, prove it.
Aspirin, for the record, would not pass if it was brought in front of the FDA today, for the record, because too many people are allergic to it
and die. Kirk Reed says have the patients bring in their meds. He means the empty pill bottles they used to use before they started on. Ryan Bringold actually did that today, and had he had a chance to speak, he would have been able to actually show them all the different medicines that he saved himself from. Here's the thing. I mean, we're trying to establish the need for our medicine, but these people are focused, as Tiffany mentioned, on money. They're focused on potential revenue, making things easier for law enforcement, the traditional things that legislators value. She also said something very valuable. They are working on emotion. They're not working on information or logic. I think that's true. We clearly know they're not
definitely not working on logic.
Nope, they're not.
Established that a long time ago.
So Susan Fisher, my Susan, and of course Amy Carter, their testimony today was very moving.
Did that picture come up, by the way? The share of Amy testimony?
It did.
Okay,
you showed
right.
it with she was holding up her list. Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Her son, her picture of her son.
Oh, that's what it was at
Right.
that point.
It's a family, yeah.
Oh, her family, right? Yes.
Yep. So, I mean,
More than hope.
wow. We need more of that next week. When next hearing, when they vote, we need a lot of those emotional imagery. And I'd love to see Anton Harb and some of the veterans come out and say, look, caregiving is something that helps us bond as vets. And we can talk about this and we can communicate on a level that you can't otherwise. And even vets that don't get social, they still find so much relief.
Wasn't there there's a protest in Washington D.C. with veterans, in which they did the similar, but they had a shit ton of empty like pill bottles. I mean, it was. Right.
Yeah, I was able to participate after a conference in DC, an ASA conference, where we learn about the medical marijuana laws and science, but then we lobbied legislators in Congress, Senate, and representatives together. The veterans participated in a couple different actions. One where they posted on the, I believe, the VA building, imagery of veterans, and then we did participate where they dropped the pill bottles in the mountains, the pill bottles by the Washington Monument.
That's crazy. But
Well,
Stacey, they have not announced the next hearing date. Go ahead, please, Brandy. I just want to answer.
The veterans, you know, they should be stakeholders as well. And so please, if you're a veteran, I'm urging you to share, like if you want to share your video testimony or a picture with a sign that says, I am a cannabis patient or / caregiver, or I'm a cannabis caregiver. And, you know, share those, you know, like Tiffany said, if you're come out of the closet, we can share those imagery and we can make sure that our voices are heard that way. If we don't get the time to have the testimony be heard, like we were ignored today. So that's why I'm going to use the power that we have in the social media to share these stories. And then be sure to reach out to the advocacy groups, use the information that's there so you can keep up on calling them and emailing them, so you're paying attention to all of the dates that are coming up real quick. I do feel that the patient testimony have been heard today may have killed the bill entirely, but it's obvious that we're not going to stop the forces of prohibition that were aligned and very well organized today. So I believe in the power of our group and the Michigan patients and caregivers who brought us this very law that we're trying to defend, that you're all going to come together and we're all going to work together. And in every way that we can, we're going to make sure that we get our voices, protect the patients so they can keep their caregivers.
Yeah. Yep. Again, there's so many reasons why caregivers provide a necessary outlet for cannabis needs. Here's something that they talked about again today, which I think we sometimes don't talk about enough. According to the Anderson Economic Group, everybody or most everybody in Michigan lives about a 20-minute drive away from a cannabis licensed facility. You know what that means? Everybody has access to tested, licensed cannabis should they choose that pathway. Now, the fact is, what we're doing is saying we want multiple pathways to attain our medicine. And in fact, we actually have 3 pathways to attain our medicine because as medical patients in the state of Michigan, we have a doctrine of asymmetric protection. That means that as a patient, I can buy cannabis from an alien dressed like Elvis on Michigan Avenue in front of the Capitol building, and I will not get in trouble. The alien might have to do some time, but I will not get in trouble because as a patient, you're allowed to acquire your cannabis from any source without penalty. Adam's nodding his head. You know what I'm saying.
Well, yeah. And again, they pointed out a number of things that were important. They're coming for the medical patient. They're coming for the illicit market. The illicit market's much larger than the medical patient market. Much, 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 much larger. This is a Trojan horse, ladies and gentlemen. This is our foot in the door, as we used to say when we were having our secret meetings trying to legalize weed, and we came at them with medical marijuana, and they said, you're just trying to get your foot in the door for legalization. And we said, no, this is about the patients. Bullshit. It's about everything.
Get the sick and dying
One
off
step
the
at a
battlefield.
time. And you know what? We changed a lot of attitudes with medical marijuana. A lot of people are now looking back going, what was I thinking? My granddaughter's teaching me so much. My nephew's teaching me so much. What was I thinking? Oh, I was so wrong. So this is just one small stepping stone up for them. And I think they might have misstepped. And it's our opportunity to prove it to them. So,
You know, that evolution of thought that you just talked about, when you're a grandmother or a parent or even just a regular person, and you see that with your eyes, you believe that. You believe that all the things you knew before were wrong, and you're ready to come into this new revelation. But if you were an agent of the war on drugs, it's really hard to make that leap, because that means you have to look back on your past behavior and say, maybe I did some stuff I thought was okay at the time, but really, maybe that wasn't the right thing. Maybe I did contribute to, disproportionately affecting minority groups with the way that we did things during the war on drugs, or disadvantaged people in many different ways. So it's a hard thing for them to realize.
And that's why I question law enforcement's involvement in any bill writing or any approval or anything. Law enforcement should not only be taken out back and, the law enforcement should have to apologize for the way they treated us for the last 80 years. And the fact of the matter is that they have destroyed more lives than cannabis. We all know that. And they're not even agreeing that there might be a different way. They're just still hammering the same old routine. And why? Because it's hitting them financially. They're losing the money. We know that about law enforcement. They're the example of why this is so disgusting.
And since they haven't been able to justify chasing cannabis cultivation, and let's face it, of all of the drug interdiction that police officers did for decades, cannabis was the most prevalent investigation they put on. Even though they don't have cannabis to chase around anymore, I'm not seeing an improvement in the number of rapes solved or the number of murders solved. So I question the resources and the way that they're dictated. You know what I do see? A lot more cops being asked to stay out on the road writing traffic tickets, generating funds. Instead of doing investigative work, they're in a revenue generation thing. And by the way, that means all of us are mobile ATM machines. They can get us for money anytime. Jamie may have gotten a parking ticket today in Lansing. I don't know. I'm just speculating. But if he did, that makes him one of those little ATM machines, right? Somebody, instead of being used in a different manner, in a more appropriate way to spend that labor, was actually out trying to bust cars for being 5 minutes over on the meter.
Yeah, I am a victim. No question.
Jamie's
I proudly pay my ticket at Hash Bash for parking at a meter, so I'm not opposed to paying to park. I am opposed for the.
I should have parked closer if I was.
There you go. Right.
Accept that.
If you're gonna catch the ticket, you might as well, get right in there.
Well, I know people that rent a hotel room and they immediately say, "I'm going to pay this $250 damage deposit for the smoking because it's going to
exactly
happen."
Right.
So
Big Daddy used to do that.
build that right into the price of the room, buddy. Let's take care of it right now. And I don't want to hear any calls from the desk about it either, motherfucker. So I guess that only works at Adams events where they rent the entire hotel room and the entire hotel period. And
there's this agreement to do some post work and really, take care of whatever issues that they have, though. So it's not that, that straightforward.
Yeah. Brandy.
I have some breaking news. Also, that a place that is quite nice that we've been allowed to enjoy our social time and our medicine. Cannabis Council has generously offered to host gathering for patients and caregivers to organize and write letters, make your calls, and co-hosted by Michigan Normal and the ASA chapters.
Beautiful.
So as soon as we get the date, we will put out that notice. So I'm very excited. We'll have an opportunity for people in Detroit. And I encourage people all locally, if you need to get together and gather together and, have a party, have a letter signing party. We need to make sure constituent voices are the ones that are heard, not the high dollar lobbyists who can show up with this bar. It was almost as if I thought in my head, sitting behind him, because I was almost directly behind the presentation, that it's like the open bribe. He's like, I got booze, I got weed, check me out. When you got a hangover, I got your ibuprofen.
You need a Sudafed
hookup.
hookup.
Party. That's
Hey.
Come to the party, Steve.
He is evil, Steve. He could do that.
We're just about hitting 6. We'll be talking about this shit a lot. Brandy, anything else you want to throw in before we?
Other than my gratitude and love for you all, I just appreciate being a part of this amazing movement. and really believe in the faith and the power that we have working together. And I love all you.
Right on. Hey, Adam, you want to throw in any final thoughts?
Yeah, I'm just happy that today went down the way it did, because I think it was very telling. I think we learned a lot today. I think we got to see some exquisite. I'm really excited. I want to go back and watch it and listen and hear Rick get all bent out of shape. That was just phenomenal, Rick. I mean, I know you think you lost your cool.
It was composed.
You didn't lose your cool at all, bro.
Yeah.
You were perfect.
It was an
And
appropriate.
I was really proud. I think we had a good day. I mean, I think it showed some true colors. So, we don't have to win every battle. We will win this war, and hopefully we won't have to call the yahoos out to help us. But we're good for the moment.
Right on. Jim was there. He came on today and gave us some insight into some of the stuff going on and his thoughts on things. Anything you want to add?
It was great. I think, Rick, you should play yourself, because, when I rethink back to
He does that often, I think.
your performance, it was amazing. So I think you can do it yourself, and I think that's what they're going to do. They're going to give you a Screen Actors Guild card. You're going to get your union card. You'll become famous in that regard, and you'll still help cannabis. October 24th at Home of Medicine at 1 p.m. Barking Dog Daryl Brown will be there to talk about his art. It's actually there right now. If you're 21 and over, it is a cannabis dispensary, so you have to walk in and show your card, but you can check out his artwork. He was the keynote speaker at the Entheo Fest that happened last month. So.
Yeah, that was awesome. We'll talk more about that stuff too. So just very quickly, I don't think it was mentioned. I think I tried to bring it up once, but I just wanted to make sure it's on record and people understand this too. When Shelley Edgerton gives this type of testimony or makes statements in press about how it's very important for this testing to happen for just, the caregiver medicine, just their patients and stuff. She was the head of lab when emergency rules had caregivers bringing their product directly to retail stores, no other requirement, and there were no issues. Anyway, Rick, please wrap it up for us. And you did do an awesome job today.
Thanks very much, everybody. What we're seeing today is, as Adam said, just another battle in a long war. We do need as many soldiers on the field as possible, but let's also not forget about all of the people that can't participate in this. This week, I put out a post on Facebook asking us to have 1 week of work. Tomorrow is Writing Your Lawmakers. Friday is Be Kind to Another Patient Day, right? Let's do that. Let's be kind to other patients and other cannabis users. Let's go out of our way to make sure that we establish those bonds of brotherhood while we're still fighting against further bondage from the government. Okay? Let's do that for each other, and that'll be how we get through this, is together.
Right on. Bondage.
You had to make it weird. You had to make it weird.
Well, thanks, everybody. Jazz Cabbage Cafe. Be back next week. We're continuing this conversation, but we'll try to incorporate some other stuff in next time too. Thanks again. Thanks everybody. Thanks Tiffany and everybody else who was on before. Deborah. See you guys.
Take care. Peace.